What we're going to deal with in today's shiur is the topic of the world's greatest character assassin. That's what we're calling it, the world's greatest character assassin. Who is that? As we'll see, we're referring actually to Haman. And I would like to start, before we get into the text, we're going to be analyzing really two pieces of the Megillah with some sources. What we'll find is this, that very often you have a problem. When you read an op-ed, you know full well where the person's coming from. It's an editorial, right? Person may have a liberal bent, may have a conservative bent, may be pro, may be anti, and you know who you're dealing with. The problem is what happens very often when we watch the news. Whether it's reading the news, the New York Times, the Washington Post, whether it is watching CNN, Fox, whatever it may be, you have a reporter, and after all the news that's fit to print, what they're doing, they're giving you an objective presentation of the facts. You want to know an opinion? You want to know an analysis? Well, you know what? Go to the op-ed page. But we're dealing with an objective presentation of the facts. That is problematic. Why is that so problematic? Because they're not objective. We who happen to be people that have a background and knowledge of Israel, we see just how corrupt, how manipulative they are when it comes to taking facts, twisting them, quoting them out of context, presenting it in a slanted view, one side. We're very familiar with that. But why are they so powerful and why is that so insidious? Because after all you're doing, the innocent observer watching it, the innocent observer reading it, is you're just getting the facts. If you want an opinion, if you want an analysis, well, you go to the op-ed or you go to the editorial page. That is why it's so dangerous. And by the way, whether it's the BBC, whether it's Sky News, whether it's CNN, over the course of the last 2-3 decades, the hatchet job that they've done on Israel, in the name of objective journalism, in the name of just presenting the facts, has been horrific. The effect that it's had on the population that watches the news, that reads the news in the Western world. You can just imagine areas that we're not so familiar with, that we don't have a background in, we don't understand. What we're thinking, what we're hoping is objective facts, very often is nothing more than a character assassination. It's a hatchet job. It's an undermining in the name of objectivity. Let's leave that and let's go to our text. The Gemara says the following. It says, no one could speak lishna bisha. What's lishna bisha? Lashon hara, we'd say. Lashon hara. No one could engage in a derogatory tongue, in character assassination, Haman, like Haman. What made Haman so special? Why was he the best one at destroying people, at verbally destroying and undermining their credibility? Why? For the same reason that we discussed with the newspapers. You know why? Because we're going to see two scenarios. How ultimately he brings about the execution of Vashti, which didn't have to happen. He brings about Vashti's execution. And the second scenario is about how he brings about the genocide of the Jewish people. He almost destroys the Jewish people. I mean, we who have been in the aftermath, we who are the children and grandchildren of the loss of 1/3 of world Jewry, and we know how that destroyed and devastated not just those who were executed and killed by the Nazis and by the Eastern Europeans, but what it undid in terms of our whole institutions. Today's assimilation rate that you have in Western America, today's ignorance rate that you have, whether it's in Israel, the Western world, whether you have it in Israel, whether it's in Europe, Australia, Canada, America, there's a reason that when you take out those infrastructures that were destroyed by the Nazis, by the Catholic Poles, by the Ukrainians, by the Lithuanians, when you undermine the various institutions, it's not just those who are executed and killed. It's those who survive, go to places where there are no educational institutions, there is no fabric, there is no community, and we have to rebuild it. And what happens in the rebuilding? The Jewish people are lost. They assimilate out, they become ignorant, tragically. And that's happened over the course of the last 70 years. That was the destruction of 1/3 of world Jewry. What happens if you do that to all of world Jewry? If we take Mehodu ad Kush, if we look at the Persian Empire under Achashverosh, that it went as far as India, it went as far as Central Africa, probably 90% of world Jewry would have been annihilated in this genocide decree. And we're going to see how Haman, it was never about him. It was never about his obsession with Mordechai. It was never about his burning rage, his diabolical hatred of the Jewish people. No. It was all about him presenting objective facts, looking to protect the king. He had nothing to do with it. He's the reporter. He's just presenting facts. That's why he was so good. If I come after you, right now in the live audience, we have David Frankel, and I start going to David Frankel and I start attacking someone, you know what he's going to say? David's going to say, look, you know, Weil's got a bug about this guy. Weil's got an issue. He's got an agenda. This guy's got Weil's number. Look at him. He really knows how to get under Weil's skin. So David's going to take it with a grain of salt. However, if Ev's not, I love this guy. I have no issues with this guy. I'm just looking at the situation, presenting some facts. Then David's going to accept those facts as just as facts. And that's exactly what he does with Vashti. That's exactly what he does with the Jews. With that introduction, we're going to look at two texts. One is Perek Aleph. Pasuk Tes Zayin in Perek Aleph, the 16th verse. Vayomer Memuchan. Now, right away, it's very interesting. Chazal say, why is he called Memuchan? His name is Haman, right? His name is Haman. Memuchan, Chazal say from the word Muchan, he was setting himself up to become the most powerful man on the face of the earth. He was also setting himself up for his own downfall and destruction. From the word Muchan, preparing himself. What was the idea? When we had a list earlier in Perek Aleph in the first chapter of the various ministers of the royal cabinet, where's Haman? Where's Memuchan? He's the last. You know, there's the prime minister, there's the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, and all the way at the end is the secretary of agriculture. That's where he is. So Gemara says the following. I want to apologize. The Gemara is on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. It says, Ma ra Memuchan likpots be'etzat chila. Why is it that Memuchan or Haman, why does he jump up? You know, usually you let those who are in a higher position, a more prominent position, let them speak first. Why does he jump in here? In other words, what Chazal saw is, wait a second, there's something very strange going on here. There's got to be something going on beneath the scenes. Why is he so eager to do this? Now, before we answer the question why, let's read the text. Text is very strange. So Memuchan says, before the king v'hasarim, he says it before the whole royal cabinet, Lo ala melech levado avsa Vashti hamalka. Queen Vashti's sin by refusing the king, by telling the king off when he asked her to appear with only the royal crown on, it wasn't just an affront, a personal affront to the king. It was a what? Ki al kol hasarim ve'al kol ha'amim asher b'chol medinos hamelech Achashverosh. This was an affront to what? To everyone, to every member of the cabinet. This was an affront to the common man, to all of the peoples. Those men who are out there fighting in the king's army, those men who pay taxes, those people who are out there looking after the king, loyal to the king, servants of the king, what she did was an affront to them. What does it have to do with them? What is he saying? Asher b'chol medinos hamelech, no matter where they are, in North Africa, in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, in Uzbekistan, no matter where they are, this was an affront to them. Why? Ki yetzei devar hamalka al kol hanashim lavzos ba'alehan. You know what'll happen? You know what's going to happen? When word gets out what the queen did to the king, this will be the beginning of a feminist revolution. When Archie Bunker comes home, right, the most famous chair in the history of the United States, when you go to the Smithsonian, what do you see? Archie Bunker's chair. And he comes home and says, "Get out of my chair! Edith, where's my beer? Where's my Twinkies?" And he sits down, he has his beer and his Twinkies that Edith runs in from the kitchen and gives to him. And then he starts cursing out Walter Cronkite. "You communist, pinko, lefty, you..." Could you imagine if Edith does what? Archie, don't tell me what to do. And don't tell me not to sit in your chair. And you go in the kitchen and the refrigerator and get your own beer and Twinkies. I'm not your slave. The fear is what? That this is what Edith is going to say to Archie. The fear is what? That the shoemaker, that the tailor, that the farmer, that the blacksmith's wife is going to tell off her husband. Why? Because word will get out as to what the queen has done to the king. What was he doing? What was the logic of what Haman was doing? So we're going to answer that question in a minute. I mean, it seems very strange to us. It seems very strange. You think because the queen told off the king, so now this woman is going to tell off her husband? It has nothing to do with the queen and the king. If she's passive and she's docile, she's not going to be offensive to her husband. And if she's aggressive and she's domineering, she's always going to be offensive to her husband. It has nothing to do with what the queen and the king do. It has to do with the psychological dynamic of a husband and a wife. Why did he do this? What was Haman doing? What was the method to what Haman was doing here? Before we answer that question, let's go back to answer the first question. What was his motivation? So there's a fascinating Medrash Rabbah. What does the Medrash say? There are three possibilities. Gimel Amoroi, three possibilities that the Amoraim give, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So, Ma Ra'a Memuchan Likbot Beitzatchila, Plige Gimel Amoraim. I want to apologize. Before I said that this was a Gemara in Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. I apologize. It's actually a Medrash Rabbah. It's Esther Rabbah. What does it say? Chad Amar, Shehayasa Misataraso B'minal al Panav. Shene'amar, Lo Melech Levado Avsa Vashti Amalka. The first opinion says, you know what? This had nothing to do with Achashverosh. It had everything to do with Haman. Vashti was a shrew. You know, when Shakespeare was looking for a model that he created Lady Macbeth after, who did he turn to? Zeresh, and Haman's wife, and he turned to Vashti. What did she do? She took off, and I mean, this is a queen, she's supposed to be dignified. She took off her slipper, or I should say her royal shoe, and she took it and she smacked him across the face. It was personal. She had humiliated, she had affronted Haman, and this was his way of getting her. It had nothing to do with him. When he says, Lo al hamelech levado avsa Vashti hamalka, he's not being honest. He's not saying, I want to get her, that shrew, I'm going to fix her for what she did to me. Oh, no. It had nothing to do with him. But he alludes to it. Second opinion that the Medrash Rabbah quotes, it's Zeresh. We know there's no fight like a cat fight, right? Well, what happened? All of the female members of the aristocracy, the wives of the ministers, the wives of the governmental officials, they're invited. Except for who? Zeresh and Vashti hate each other. And Vashti makes Zeresh stay home. Haman, he shows up, he has to be there, he's part of the cabinet, and he's drinking and he's having a fine time. And what happens as soon as he gets home? He's got his wife. You know, the pit bull terrier is at the door. How can you do that? How can you enjoy yourself? How can you sit and drink and eat and be merry? She humiliated your wife. What are you going to do about it? And Zeresh was just doing this to Haman all the time. Meaning what? It may not have been an affront to Haman, the second opinion says. It may have been about Zeresh. And we know one thing. There's a reason why David HaMelech in Tehillim refers to the wife as Akeres Habayis. Not Akeret from the word of being, the Pashut Pshat of the meaning what? That she's barren, that she's infertile. But Akeret from the word Ikar. The wife defines the dynamic of a family. Haman was he was a Rasha Merusha. Haman was the embodiment of Amalek. But there were a lot of people who were the embodiment of Amalek. Haman took it to the degree that he did because he had a Zeresh. He had a partner. He had a partner in crime. And you see that here when it came to the story of Vashti. She's got it out for Vashti. So that's part of what's motivating him. And the third has nothing to do necessarily with his personal hatred of Vashti, has nothing to do his motivation with his wife's personal hatred of Vashti. It's just he had a daughter. And he's power hungry. We know that about Haman, how power hungry he was. When the Rorschach test was given to him, when Achashverosh says to him, what would you do if you wanted to honor someone who the king really cared about? What did he do? He projected his desires, his craving, his subconscious craving, and maybe conscious craving for power. You put him in the royal crown, you put the royal garment, the cloak on him, you put him on the king's horse, you give him the royal scepter. We know what Haman wanted. He was power hungry. What happens? There's two ways to get power. You can seize power. That requires a revolution, a military. Or you can do it much easier. If you can bump off Vashti, you marry into power. If he can get his daughter to be the next queen, If his daughter becomes the next queen, that's how he gains power. And it's not just him. It means his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. So what happens? Haman does not mention a word about his desire for power, to get his daughter in as the next queen. Never says a word about it. Haman never says a word about his wife or his own personal hatred for Vashti. Oh no, he's Mr. Objective. This is not the op-ed. This is not the editorial page. This is the front page. This is just the objective reporter of the facts. What does Haman do to Achashverosh? He does the following, and we have to make one introductory remark, just one brief introductory remark. We know, and we talked about this in last week's shir, we know how paranoid Achashverosh was. We know how fearful he was. He seized power. He was not the inheritor of power. And just like he took it from others who it belonged to, his great fear is that someone would take it from him. Why the huge expense to ingratiate himself to the leaders, to the administrations of all the different provinces? Why the desire to ingratiate himself to the common man? He wanted to be loved. He wanted to be supported. He wanted people who would be loyal, because his greatest fear is that what he did to others, someone would do to him. So what does Haman do? He plays on that fear. He plays on that insecurity. That's the brilliance of Haman. How did Haman go from being Secretary of Agriculture to the Prime Minister? From being number 7 in the cabinet to being number 1? Because he knew Achashverosh's emotional Achilles heel, and he played on it. Achashverosh came to trust him, to be needy of him, to depend upon him. What did Haman do? He says, "Your king, my majesty, this wasn't just an affront to you." Why does he start out with that? Lo al melech levado. You know why? Because what should have happened? Achashverosh was drunk. He was inappropriate in what he did to Vashti. It was demeaning. It was degrading. So she humiliated him. She had a fresh mouth. Okay, what she did was wrong. What he did was wrong. Let's get over it. Let's sober up and let's move forward. It was a bad scene, but let's move forward. There's more to this marriage. There's more to this relationship than one night of a fight. And that should have happened. But it didn't. You know why? It didn't because of Haman. Because he says, this is not you. It's not about you. It's not just that she did an affront to you. I'll call hasarim. This was an affront to everyone who cares about you, who's loyal to you, who works for you. Now, he can't stop there. You know why he can't stop there? Because the royal cabinet could say the following. Look, this was a terrible experience. Let's get over it. Let's move forward. Let's just get this behind us. Everyone will say we're sorry, and let's move forward. What happens if they do that? That's why he jumps on what? He plays the role of the same methodology that every dirty politician in the history of humanity has played. He champions the cause of the common man. Al kol ha'amim b'chol medinos malchusecha. Those loyal soldiers, those loyal tax-paying workers, those low middle income, those peasants who are loyal, who care about you, who are concerned about you. This is going to destroy them. The very people that you care about, the very people that you want their loyalty, the very people who've shown their loyalty, this is going to undermine them. Because if a man can't be the king in his own castle, if when Archie comes home and says, Edith, get me the beer and Twinkies, and she tells him off, go to the kitchen, get your own beer and Twinkies, don't tell me what to do, it will undermine all loyalty, all sincerity, and all trust in you. He trapped Achashverosh. He cornered Achashverosh. He put him in a corner where Achashverosh had no way out. Because the one thing that means the most to Achashverosh is staying in power, being admired, being respected, and loyalty. And what Haman did was he played him perfect. It had nothing to do with his hatred of Vashti, nothing to do with Zeresh's hatred of Vashti, nothing to do with his desire for power by getting his own daughter in as the queen. No. He's the objective reporter. He's only got one concern, based upon the facts and what's happening. Now keep in mind, it's very often like, we use the analogy, what happened to Richard Milhouse Nixon? while he was almost trapped in the White House, while Sam Ewing, while the press was, Watergate took on a life of its own. It became something more than it was. And Nixon didn't realize that the population out there didn't have the same fixation on Watergate as he did. Why? They had jobs. It was a very difficult time. It was the first time that there was an Arab oil embargo. It was the first time that prices of gasoline skyrocketed. The economy wasn't doing well. People just wanted to be able to support themselves, pay their mortgages in a time of great inflation. And what happened was he wasn't out there. He didn't have his ear to the street. What was the mentality and the psyche of the common man? It's the same thing with Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus is trapped not in the White House, but in the Persian royal cabinet, in the Persian royal palace. And he's not sensitive to what's going on. Haman is reporting facts that are not facts. Haman is reporting data that's not data. Haman is laying it out like it's the facts and this is the way it is when it really wasn't. And now Ahasuerus has no choice but to execute Vashti. He's got no choice. And I got to tell you this. On an unconscious level, we spoke about this last week, on an unconscious level, it doesn't manifest itself until he finds out that Haman wants to kill his second wife. Ahasuerus, Haman is planting the seeds. Mimuchan, he's setting himself up for his own execution. Because he's planting the seeds in Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus did not want to kill Vashti. He may have despised her. He might have had great animus, but he also loved her. It was a love-hate relationship. And Haman forced him to kill his own wife. And that manifests itself. That comes out. It comes to the foreground. When? When Esther pops the question. And when Esther lets him know that she's Jewish. And that not only did he kill your first wife, now he wants to kill your second wife. Stop there. Let's move from Perek Aleph to Perek Gimel. The genocide of the Jewish people. The second example of the world's greatest character assassin. Haman. No one could speak Lishna Bisha, Lashon Hara, like Haman. Now it's very interesting. If you look at the text in Perek Gimel, and we know that what led to all of this? What led to this is that his tremendous animosity towards Mordechai. Haman, who was so full of himself, so arrogant, couldn't stand the fact, it wasn't just that Mordechai was lo yichra v'lo yishtachave, he didn't bow at the knee, didn't prostrate himself to Haman. Like Mordechai was, in Mordechai's eyes, Haman was irrelevant. He was a non-player. He's flesh and blood. Hayom kan umachar bekever. Here he's today, tomorrow he'll be maggot feed 6 feet under. He was nothing more than another egomaniac who was a fool, who wasn't happy and wasn't secure in who and what he was, but had this need for power. Because Mordechai had Haman's number, and that enraged Haman. The fact that Mordechai had his number, that enraged him. And who was Mordechai? Mordechai was the quintessential Jew. He wasn't some assimilated Jew who wanted to hobnob with the Persian aristocracy. He was a Jew who had a totally contrary value system to everything that Haman stood for and everything that Haman craved. And because what did it do? When he saw Mordechai, if Mordechai would have tried to taunt him, if Mordechai would have cursed him, so Mordechai, that means, was machshiv him. He treated him seriously. He hated him. He wanted to get to him. That's not what Mordechai did. What did Mordechai do? Mordechai ignored Haman. Haman was an irrelevancy to Mordechai. There's no source of power in the universe other than God. That got to Haman because it undermined the whole charade and the whole fallacy that Haman had built about himself. So what happens? When Haman comes to the king, you know what Haman was? Mordechai, I use an analogy, it's like espresso coffee. It's concentrated. Or it's like, casket strength single malt. Before you take some water and dilute it a little bit, no. Mordechai was a casket strength single malt Jew. That's what he was. So what happens? When Haman comes before Ahasuerus, there is not a word, not one word about the Jewish people. Now we're going to read a series of Gemaras and Midrashim in the next couple of minutes. In the Chazal's understanding, there was a discussion, and it was very clear he was spelling out it was the Jews. But if you look at the text itself, in the Meforshim debate, Did Achashverosh know it was a Jew? Some Mefarshim say, of course he knew it was the Jews. He was a very smart, cunning person. The reason that they didn't put the Jews in here was to make Achashverosh, this is something going to be translated into Persian. You don't want to make Achashverosh look bad. So the reason it never mentioned the Jews here is because, Achashverosh was duped by a wicked, sinister prime minister. Many of the Mefarshim take a different approach. He's not told that it's the Jews. Not till the very end. Because you know what? It's not about the Jews. And after all, with Haman, it's not about me. I have nothing against the Jews. It's all about Achashverosh. It's all about watching his back. It's all about protecting the king, the benevolent, wise, wonderful king. There's a cancer in the empire that's trying to undermine him and delegitimize him amongst his own people. Let's read the text inside. Vayomer, it's a very short text. Perek Gimel, Pasuk Ches, chapter 3, verse 8. Vayomer Haman lamelech Achashverosh, yeshno am echad. Literally, there is this one nation, not told who it is. Mifuzar, scattered, umeforad. So what's the difference between mifuzar and meforad? It seems both are synonyms for being scattered or dispersed, bein ha'amim, amongst the various peoples, amongst the various nations, unlike everyone else, where they live in this place or they live in that place. This is Egypt, this is Tunisia, this is Afghanistan. No, this is mifuzar meforad bein ha'amim, b'chol midinos malchusecha. Again, they're in each and every one of the provinces. V'dasehem shonos mikol am. Their laws are different than any other people. What does that mean? V'dasei hamelech einam osim. They don't, not just that they're different, it's one thing to be different, but at least to be a loyal member of the Persian Empire. But they don't observe the laws. They don't observe the dat can mean theology, it can mean laws. One is the practical ramifications of a system, the other is the system itself. It has both meanings. But they don't observe the system or the laws of the king. V'lamelech ein shovel hanicham. There's no value whatsoever in allowing them to exist, in allowing them to continue to exist. Imal melech tov, if it's good for the king, yikasev la'abadam. Let it be written by decree. We'll send out the Pony Express. This is going to cost a fortune of money. In fact, because I'm so concerned for the king's welfare, I'll pay it. The Aseris alafim kikar kesef eshkol al yedei. I will do it. I'll pay for it. In order to do what? To prevent an insurrection. To prevent this cancer from metastasizing more than it already has, and from devouring and destroying and terminating the empire. Let's go back and analyze those few, very short but powerful. To be honest with you, it's a verse and a half. It's 1.5 psukim. Obviously, it was a much longer conversation than Perek Gimel Psukim Ches and Tes, chapter 3, verses 8 and 9. It's much longer than that. So Chazal developed what was going on. The first thing you know is that Yeshno Am Echad. Amar le'at la'Achashverosh. We're now quoting the Megillah on Yud Gimel Amud Beis. Masechta Megillah Yud Gimel Amud Beis. There is this one nation. So Haman says to Achashverosh, Ta nechlinu. We've got to annihilate. We've got to engage in a genocide. We've got to stop this people. Amar le, Achashverosh says, Mistafina me'elokav. I'm afraid of the God of the Jews. I'm not afraid of the Jews. They're a refugee people. They're an exile people. We've been in control of them now for almost 20 years. I'm afraid of their God. Remember what happened to Belshazzar when he tried to walk out and to parade in the spoils of the Holy Temple? Look at the past history. Look at what happened to the Pharaoh for what he did to their baby boys. Look at what happened to Amalek. Look at what happened to anyone who's tried to stop them, to annihilate them. I don't want their God to take vengeance on me. So Haman, what's his response to that? Amar le, from the word yeshno means there is, but if you read it differently, you could read it yashnu, from the word yashan. Yashnu mina mitzvahs. They're stale. They don't observe the mitzvahs anymore. There's a reason that they've been sent into exile. They've become assimilated. They don't care themselves that much for their God. Did you see the way they were fressing at your parties? Did you see how excited they are about being Persians? Amar le. Achashverosh says, wait a second. Isbuhun Rabbanan, but they have some righteous members, right? There are members of this people that are very pious and very righteous. It was apparent to all that there were pious, righteous Jews, the rabbis. Amar le am echad hein. What does it mean, yeshno am echad? Am echad. They have one destiny. What our anti-Semites say about us, sometimes we forget that lesson. The Jewish people have one destiny. We are responsible one for the other. And if we fail, if we only take care of ourselves, right, the tzaddik in pelts, right, the righteous person in the warm fur coat, but if we're not sensitive to the needs and the plight of our others, spiritually, educationally, yeshno am echad. What's yeshno am echad? Yeshno doesn't just mean there is. It doesn't mean that they've become old and stale. It's from the word shinoi, right? What's lishanot? To change, to be different, to change from the norm. Listen to this medrash. Yeshno am echad, davar acher, yeshno am echad, shneihan ravravan. They have very, very differences, great differences. Ochlin v'shosin v'omrim oneg Shabbos, oneg Yom Tov. You know what they are? They observe different days. Everyone else goes to church on Sunday. These people won't work on Sunday. Everyone is working on Saturday. These people, no, they sit, they get fat, they eat, they drink, they have fine wine. They're different. There's something very strange, very sinister about them. There's another medrash, Vidasehem shonos. Their laws are different. You know, there's many different religions in the Persian Empire. There are very many different peoples, but we intermarry, we get along, we attend each other's religious services, we respect each other's holidays. What do these people do? They won't eat with us. They won't drink with us. They don't eat our food. They won't marry our daughters. They won't provide their daughters to us to marry. They're different. What you see, no one likes to be rejected. And by the way, it's very offensive if someone won't eat with you. It's offensive if you're a universalist. And remember, in the Persian Empire, it was the great universal empire. They won't marry you. That's very offensive. They won't date you. They won't eat with you. They won't observe your holidays. Not only that, but you know what they do? It's always a Shabbos, a Rosh Chodesh, a Passover, a Shavuos, a Rosh Hashanah, a Yom Kippur, a Sukkot, a Shmini Atzeres. Do you understand? These people are in a position of power. They're in a position of influence. They own companies, and they bring the economy to a halt. They bring the government to a halt because many of them work in the government. Do you understand what they do? If you add up all the days of the year, 52 Shabbatot, right? And then you add up the holidays. There's 70, 80 days a year when everyone else is working, and they bring this economy to a halt. They leech off of us, they get rich off of us, they take positions of power for themselves, and then they destroy the economy. And they destroy the whole ability of the government to function. So the Ribbono Shel Olam says, Russia, you complaining about their holidays? I'm going to add another holiday to their calendar. And that, of course, is Purim. What's mifuzar umifurad? Now, so you understand what he's doing. So he says they're scattered. If you don't radiate them, if you don't nuke these people, they will destroy. They're like no one else. They're everywhere, they're every place, and they're in every position. They're in every industry, they're in every country, they speak every language. If you don't eradicate them now, they'll take over, they'll bring down the whole empire. What's mifurad? So the king says to him, it's from the word preda. You know what a preda is? A mule. What's unique biologically, zoologically, what's unique about a mule? Besides that it's a product of a horse and a donkey. A mule's infertile. It doesn't produce. So the king says back to them, if they're everywhere and they speak every language and they're in every industry, I'll destroy the empire by destroying them. They're so crucial. They're such a linchpin to this empire. If I go after them, I bring down, it'll affect every country, every province, every Medina. Someone says, no, they're like a preda. All they do is they take, they leech, they suck us dry, they produce nothing. They're middlemen. Our people work in factories, our people work on the farms, and these are the middlemen. They're the Wall Street bankers, and they make money off of our products. They don't produce anything themselves. Look at the industries they're in. They produce nothing. They're lawyers. All they do is take our hard-earned money. They're accountants. They legislate laws, and then they make laws to drive us crazy, and then they charge us services for it. That's what these people are. They produce nothing. You will lose nothing. You will lack nothing in this empire. You understand? It's all about the king. It has nothing to do with Haman. Nothing to do with him. It's all about his fear of the fact that these people will bring down the empire. God forbid that that should happen to Achashverosh. Now, I want to stop for a second and mention something parenthetically. If we look at Sefer Ezra Nehemiah, Artaxerxes, that's the English name for Achashverosh, we know that Achashverosh is not a diabolical anti-Semite. He's not the obsessive anti-Semite of a Haman. But he's a Geschmack anti-Semite nevertheless. There's two categories, right? There's an anti-Semite that just doesn't like Jews, and there's an anti-Semite that's obsessed with Jews. Achashverosh is the first Persian monarch who stopped building in Yerushalayim, who had a building freeze against the Jews settling and building and rebuilding the holy city. We know that about Achashverosh. Aliyah, the numbers dropped when he became the king. So he's not someone who loves Jews to start with. He's a very willing audience. And whether Haman, as the Torah Shebaal Peh seems to say, whether Haman spelled out that he was talking about the Jews, or whether he never says anything until the end, which is much more powerful, as you see from the text, he never mentions the word the Jews until the very end. Achashverosh, when he hears this, is a willing candidate. The Gemara uses an analogy. It says, you know what Achashverosh and Haman were like? It's like two people. One has this huge mound of dirt in his backyard that doesn't enable him to develop a nice backyard. The other has a huge hole, a huge crater, that doesn't enable him to develop the backyard. The one person says, look, I'll take the dirt off your hands at no cost. The other one says, you know what? I'll give you the dirt at no cost, because it's a much bigger favor for him to get rid of the dirt than it is to try to sell the dirt. And that's exactly, they viewed the Jews as the dirt. One had the crater, one had a huge mound. They were doing each other a favor. Would Achashverosh have done this on his own? No, never. Was he a willing accomplice? Yes, absolutely. Did he have a background of anti-Semitism? Yes, absolutely. So let's go on. B'chol medinos malchusecha. The Gemara in Yud Gimel Amud Beis says, Shema Tomar Ika Medinta Minayu. Well, maybe there's a problem. If I get rid of them, if they're all in Israel, or they're all in North Africa, or they're all in Afghanistan, what will happen is we'll have a vacuum. We can't have a vacuum in the empire. Don't worry, B'chol medinos malchusecha. There's no huge concentration of them in any one place. So it won't be a problem. If you get rid of them, there'll be no black hole, there'll be no vacuum. What does it mean, Dasei HaMelech Ein Amosim? We said, they go observe separate holidays. What's Dasei HaMelech Ein Amosim? Ein Mishamrim, Lo Kalandas, Lo Saturnalia, Umevazim Moadecha. It's one thing if they would observe their Passover and their Sukkot and their Rosh Hashanah and their Yom Kippur. It's another thing when they don't observe Easter and they don't observe Xmas and they don't observe St. Patrick's Day and they don't observe the other religious holidays, Ash Wednesday and Black Friday. When they don't observe those holidays, everyone else is a polytheist in the Persian Empire. Everyone else, they do their thing and they do our thing. They show respect to us, we show respect to them. Not with these people. With these people, it's a zero-sum game. They hate us, they despise us, they mock us. He says, V'lamelech ein shaveh lahanicham. What does Haman say? Haman is brilliant. Nothing like quoting something out of context. We know the following, that in the laws of kashrus, after all, this is the OU, that is part of our brand. We know the following, that if there's a cold mixture, if something non-kosher falls into something cold, and you can identify it and remove it, in a cold mixture like that, chances are it's not going to impart taste. You don't have the problem of kavush kamavushal. It's not something that's stayed there and become part and parcel of the mixture. And you remove it. The mixture is still kosher because it has an imparted taste. Any minuscule taste has been mevutal. It's been nullified. So he says the following, you know your master? I'm sorry, you know your highness, my majesty? If a fly would fall into their wine, they would scoop up the fly and they would drink the wine. Now, you and I know there's no Jew who would drink a glass of wine when a fly fell into it. A fly has bacteria, a fly has germs, etc. But from a technical point of view, is the wine kosher? Yes. Once you remove the wine, if it's only been in there a very small amount of time, it doesn't impart taste. When you drink, you're only tasting wine. You're not tasting any fly. You remove the fly. It's kosher. But if you, my majesty, your highness, if you would touch that wine, they would throw it out. And of course, what's that referring to? The fence around assimilation. Now we know stam yenim is not asur bahana. You can derive benefit from stam yenim, you just can't drink it. So what are you going to do with a glass of wine that's already been opened or a bottle of wine? It's not respectful to give somebody a used glass of wine, a used bottle of wine. So what are we going to do with it? There's nothing we can do with it. Can't drink it at that point. Why? That's a fence around intermarriage. It's a fence around assimilation. Because wine is always the vehicle of socialization. We see that from the Megillah very clearly. It's a vehicle of of socialization, of social intercourse, of fraternization. And the rabbis put up a fence. Not because there's anything inherently unkosher about wine, but it's a fence against assimilation. What did he do? He took two laws out of context and he set it up like what? What do you mean? They won't, not only will they not drink with me, they'll throw a wine. If I would touch the wine, I, the king, the royal highness, if I would touch, they'd throw it away. But these same people would drink wine that a disgusting fly got into? He took things that technically in a certain context could be true, and he put them together. It's almost like the editing job that 60 Minutes does. There's a reason why Mike Wallace and Morley Safer, they always had one of the top 5 rated shows for decades in the history of America. Because when you edit things and you put the answer to question X is put as an answer to question Y, you can have that ability. And that's exactly what happened here. The king was enraged. These people are a threat. These people are insidious. These people are sick. These people are disgusting. And it had nothing to do with Haman's obsession with Mordechai. It had nothing to do with Haman's obsession with the Jews. He was calm, cool, collected. His face didn't show rage or anger. His face showed concern, sensitivity to what could become, to a potential threat, to the potential one Achilles heel, the downfall that could lead to the destruction of his king. That's all he was concerned about, is watching the back of the king. That is why Chazal say, no one could say Lashon Hara like Haman. And by the way, we all know people like this. If someone, and I'm repeating myself from the introduction, if someone comes to you and they're really angry and they're vicious, you take what they say with a grain of salt. You try to put it in context. There's two sides to every story. Obviously this person really has your number. Obviously you have a problem with these kind of people. But with Haman, it had nothing to do with him. Both vis-a-vis Vashti and vis-a-vis the Jewish people. And what Esther could show is, and by the way, we're going to come back to Esther in a minute. There's a great, fascinating Gemara. The Gemara says that when the Pony Express goes, the whole transportation system is now taken from its focus, and it's all focused on what? Sending out in every language, in every script, the genocide decree against the Jewish people. That they're going to open up the garrisons, they're going to open up the armories, and that everyone can kill Jews, take their wealth, use the military's weapons to do this, to fight this enemy. So the Gemara says a fascinating statement. It says, Ilmale igros harishonos. If it weren't for the first documents that went out, that every man be the king in his council, that every man be the king in his home and the champion of his own family. When people saw this, the first documents that went out, they scratched their heads. They said, what's Achashverosh? He's a misogynist. He's nuts. He's got it out for women. He's got a problem with women. What do you mean everyone be the king of his castle? It has nothing to do. I'm not going to be the king of the castle whether there is a royal decree, there isn't a royal decree. It's a function of my personality and the dynamic I have with my wife and how we get along. So now when the second igros, when the second decrees come out, oh, first he hates the women, now he hates the Jews. What kind of a nut is this guy? This is the guy who spends billions of taxpayer dollars on parties. He hates women. He hates Jews. Oh, so next he'll hate the blacks. Then after that he'll hate the Latinos. What kind of a nut is this guy? A Meshuggah. They didn't take these decrees that seriously. Only why? Only because of the first decrees. So to a great degree, what Haman did, Memuchan, right? He actually set himself up because the anti-Semites and the people would have had much greater success had there never been the first documents, the first decrees. That's point number one. Point number two is Esther, when she comes and she asks, she says, look, if we had been used as slaves, after finding out that the very Jews who Haman claimed were cancer, the very Jews who Haman claimed were this insidious poison that were going to bring him down, it was the very Jew who saved his life. Achashverosh would be a dead man. He'd be executed. He would have been assassinated had it not been for the fact that Mordechai saved his life. And who is it? The same man that killed my first wife, my queen, is the same man that wants to kill my second queen, my second wife. Wants to kill the people who have risked their lives for me, who are loyal to me. He starts to see a pattern in Haman. He starts to see that the man that he thought was his best friend, who had his back, who was looking after him, is a power hungry from the event. You know, when he said, put on the royal crown and give him the royal scepter and put him on the royal horse and take him through the heart of the capital city. That very man who claimed to be loyal, claimed to look after me, to have my back, that's the real evil in this empire. That's the man I've got to be afraid of. That's the man who killed the first woman I loved, who almost killed the second woman I loved. That's the man who killed the very people who've really shown their loyalty, who've gone out of their way to protect me. So in the end, Memuchan, he ascends to become the prime minister through his manipulation and through his presentation, quote unquote, of the facts to achieve his own personal agenda. But in the end, Memuchan, he sets himself up for what? For his own downfall and destruction. That, and just to summarize and to end, that's why Chazal said there's no one who could say Lishna Bisha. There's no one who could engage in the art of character assassination like Haman. In the practical application of this is we got to be very careful. When people come very much the way the New York Times claims to do, the way that the CNN claims to do, that they're just reporting the facts, they're just presenting the news. Be very leery of people like that. It's not just those who write the op-eds that have an opinion. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone has an agenda. And be very scrutinizing and be very, very careful about what you accept as the facts. Thank you.